and welcome. It's another Confessions podcast. And you're very welcome to an audio array of terrible tales from the discerning Radio 2 listener. This week's concise collection includes a sink satire, a petrol prank, a blind befuddlement and a terrible tub trauma. Pretty good on the alliteration this week. Who will you forgive? That is the question. Here it all comes. Here's tonight's confession. It comes from Andrew. Thank you very much indeed, Simon and the crew. This confession concerns events that took place in the late 90s as I was making my way around the world on a year-long backpacking trip. Having landed in Sydney, I was looking for work to fund my stay there and the rest of my trip back to the UK. As such, I didn't have much money for accommodation, so I was sharing a small flat in Bondi Beach with a large group of like-minded globetrotters. A recent addition to the flat had been my good friend Tom, who'd come all the way from the UK to see me on his holidays and spend some time in Australia. Now, you can imagine that the housekeeping regime wasn't exactly ideal. In fact, very little cleaning had been done in the flat, ever. The epicentre of the mess was the kitchen sink, which had been blocked for at least the last 3 months. Nobody wanted to go near it, and every effort was made to avoid using it, washing dishes in the bathroom, reusing cutlery, that kind of thing. The plug had long since been pulled out, but to no effect. The water level was right up to the brim, and amongst the detritus that floated around, the only discernible objects were the hapless Australian cockroaches that had fallen in and drowned, of which there was a substantial amount. I think we have the image there.
Thanks for that.
Thanks for painting it for us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Pictures with words. Advice was needed. So off Tom and I trotted down to the local hardware shop, where the helpful chap gave us a box of strong sink unblocking powder, as it's known. This would, we were assured, unblock even the most stubborn of sinks. Upon arrival back at the flat, a new problem arose. The miracle powder would only work when poured directly down the problematic plug hole. Pouring it into a full sink would not help. The powder would only dissolve in the water and have little effect on the blockage. This meant that we would have to empty the sink first. Being blessed with a little technical know-how, Tom and I decided a siphon would be the best approach. A large hose would be needed and a bucket. Put one end of the hose in the sink and the other end in the bucket on the floor, start the process, and the sink would be quickly and efficiently emptied. A little rummaging around the flat unearthed an old washing machine water pipe. It had certainly seen better days. It was dirty, the rubber was deteriorating, but it was perfect for our purposes. A suitable bucket was also found. Back in the kitchen, we set everything up, ready to empty the sink. Here is where we hit our next hurdle: how to start the water flowing down the hose. Anyone who's done anything similar will know that one way of doing this is to suck on the bottom end of the hose to create a vacuum and start the flow of water. It was clear to me that Tom had to be the one to do this, as I was busy supervising at the sink end of the pipe and making sure the pipe was secure, that kind of thing. I was quite surprised to find that Tom was not of the same opinion. Anyway, after much cajoling, he finally agreed that this was quite definitely the best plan. Down he went on his knees by the bucket, tube in hand. I maintained my important part of the job up at the sink, making sure the pipe was well submerged in the dirty water, well, the filthy water, well, the disgusting water. Was it my imagination that one of the cockroaches was still twitching?
Oh, no!
Here we go, I declared enthusiastically to the rest of Team Sink. Tom gingerly put the crumbling rubber hose into his mouth, ready to start the suck. I turned my attention back to the sink to make sure the hose was secure in the water. Everything from then on happened in a bit of a blur. The water in the sink sank quite a lot more rapidly than I had been expecting. Turning to look back down at Tom, all I could see was a gush of dirty water squirting from all corners of his mouth. You sucked too hard. It's all over the floor. I put the tube in the bucket. Well, he did so, but then got up and started staggering around the kitchen, alternately gagging and spitting out bits of matter.
Oh, lovely.
It was all I could do to take over his part of the work as well as mine, making sure the hose was securely in the bucket as well as in the sink. I'm proud to say I managed to do this despite all the distractions, and the sink was quickly drained. Tom did not seem interested in our success and continued to make his way erratically around the kitchen, retching. He maintains that many small creatures did in fact make their way into his mouth, some of them moving and tasting of old toad. So,
How does he know that? How does he know what old toads taste like?
It's Australia.
Yeah.
Selflessly putting his concerns ahead of mine, I grabbed a tube of toothpaste from the bathroom and proceeded to empty it into his mouth. Unwelcome as this was at first, it did the trick. I managed to calm him down. The retching subsided, and he sank into a chair, wiping the white foam away from his lips. Despite my brave actions, It was left to me to dispose of the contents of the bucket and apply the powder to the plug hole, which worked perfectly to unblock the sink. My flatmates were appreciative. So, Father Simon and the rest of the crew, I seek forgiveness from Tom for my actions. By some miracle, he remains a good friend to this day, even after what I put him through. Maybe the worst part of this is that I've since discovered a way of doing this without having to suck at all. One simply submerges the whole pipe in water, then quickly lift one end out and bring it into the bucket, and the water flows immediately. That's the way you do it without sucking, but it was too late. It was too late for his friend Tom, who had to swallow and digest some bits and pieces of Australian cockroach and other matter.
That is really revolting.
Yes,
I actually feel physically sick.
Oh,
so
come
thanks
on.
for that. I don't understand how Andrew persuaded Tom to do the sucking. I mean, if I had been Tom in that situation, I would have insisted on tossing a coin or...
He'd freshly arrived, I think.
Freshly arrived.
Yes.
I think that was a bit mean of Andrew, really. I mean, also because he was freshly arrived. But I suppose, in a way, it was Andrew's fault for agreeing to do it. Tom's fault for agreeing to do it. So he should have put up more of a fight. So therefore, I'm going to forgive you, Andrew.
Thank you. Brother Nick.
Yeah, that's the point, isn't it? Is Tom actually chose to put that tube in his mouth.
Yes.
And, I think once he made that decision to put that frayed, perishing rubber into his mouth, it's on his head.
So
forgiven.
Forgiven. Brother.
Why did they have to use this pipe? Why couldn't they just use a cup or bail it out some other way? Why at some point did they go, the only way of unblocking this sink is for me to suck this dirty water out of through a pipe?
More efficient.
Well, I would argue yes. Anything but that would have been my. I've only ever seen this done on TV and in film. So I'm grateful to them for sharing that top tip at the end of always submerge your pipe.
Yes, but
and
it
was a great tip. Well done. But Tom's a big boy. He knew what he was doing. And frankly, should have stopped sucking when when your mouth was full of dishwater. Yeah. Perhaps that would be my guess.
As your grandma always tells you as you're growing up.
She does. One of those little life lessons.
It is.
So yes, we're all going to forgive. Obviously.
Okay. All right. Here's tonight's confession. Comes from Ron. Thank you, Ron. You can send your confession via email to confessions@bbc.co.uk. Go via the website. The whole archive is there. Simon Mayo. The drive time pages, that's where you go for that. But this one from Ron. Dear Father Simon and the Fragrant Few. Welcome back, Mother Superior, by the way.
Well, it's lovely to be here.
My confession goes back some 15 years. Like people in their 20s, I had a weekend job at a large supermarket chain. I'd been working there for about 2 years and had a healthy social life. A bunch of us would regularly meet up and drive to Brighton on a Saturday night just to hang out. We liked to show off our cars to each other and have a little drive round. There were 3 of us, myself and Chris and Jacko, who would regularly hang around together and go off in each other's cars. We would take it in turns to drive so as not to harm the environment too much. Yeah, right, Ron. That's just a pathetic, desperate plea for forgiveness, I think. Chris was lazy, I have to say, and would only ever do the bare minimum of work possible. He was also extremely tight. Chris would rarely use his own car to take us anywhere, and if we wanted to stop somewhere to get food or drink, he always claimed never to have any money on him. If we went out for the night, he was first out of the taxi and last into the pub, and would always say, "No, it's fine, I don't want anything, I'll just sit here." But because we were nice folk, we would always buy him a drink. One night we were travelling through the windy routes of the South Downs when we broke down. No matter how hard we tried, there was nothing we could do to get the car started. It was 2 a.m. and we didn't really know where we were. And what with it being 15 years ago, none of us had a mobile phone. So we decided to walk to a phone box to call the recovery vehicle. It was raining, and Chris, being his usual lazy self, said that he would stay in the car to make sure nothing happened to it. This was frankly unlikely, seeing as we were in the middle of nowhere and it was in the middle of the night, but rather than argue it out, we left Chris in the car and battled the elements. It took us about 45 minutes to find a payphone, after which we had to wait another 2 hours for the recovery vehicle to pick us up. During the walk back to the car, Jacko and I moaned about how lazy Chris was and just how much we did for him, never to get anything back in return. And so the plan was hatched. The next time we went out in the car, Jacko was driving with me in the passenger seat and Chris, lazy old Chris, in the back. Jacko, by making the car jump and stutter, pumping the brake, made it feel as though there was trouble with the engine. "Oh no," he said, "I think I've run out of petrol," and steered the car to the side of the road. "I think I saw a petrol station a couple of miles back," I said. "We'll have to walk back to get some." "Are you coming?" I said to Chris. His response, which is what we'd expected, No, I'll just wait here and make sure the car is okay. Only don't be long, I'm starving. With that, James and I started walking back down the road with the petrol can in our hands. We took the car keys with us, so he couldn't try and start the car, which also meant he didn't have the radio to keep him entertained, or the heater to keep him warm while we were away. The thing is, we didn't go back to the petrol station, as we had worked out where we were going to break down, and knew that there was a pub just 2 minutes' walk around the corner. So we walked there instead. We had a couple of sherbets, a couple of games of pool, and a flutter on the fruit machines, and then ordered, as I recall, a huge plate of nachos. Then we had 2 cheeseburgers, and we had chips, and we had onion rings. We just had room for some lemon meringue and some coffee and mince, and then we were ready to go. All in all, I think we were there for 2 hours. We headed back to the car, taking our time after such a humongous meal, with the still empty petrol can in our hands. Once back at the vehicle, we pretended to fill up the car, and hey presto, the car roared to life. Chris, I have to tell you, was clearly mad with hunger and thirst and loneliness, and shouted and yelled about how scared he'd been on his own for all that time. This is where it gets weird. Apparently, some strange women hikers in velvet hats had marched past and tapped threateningly on the car roof. He'd come to the conclusion that they were ghosts, and that the countryside was haunted. He really did sound hysterical. We said that the petrol station was further away than we thought. I have no idea who the ladies in velvet hats were. Maybe they were ghosts after all. Father Simon, I need forgiveness from Chris for making him sit in a cold, dark road for many lonely hours on his own, and for scaring him so much, even though we thought he thoroughly deserved it, which he clearly did. And staying there in the car, I mean, maybe there's a well-known story about the South Downs and a mysterious gang of women hikers in velvet hats banging on car roofs.
It is quite scary that they were knocking on the window and the roof. Do you think?
I suppose if it's dark. What is a velvet?
Well, the car's there on its own, isn't it? So if they are real hikers, they would be knocking on the window, wouldn't they? Saying, what are you doing in the car on your own?
But real hikers don't wear velvet hats.
Of course,
that's a motto
right.
in life.
Yes,
remember that,
is.
kids?
Yes, remember.
Whatever you remember that.
Never ever wear a
That's
velvet
a good
hat.
car sticker,
Does
isn't
anyone
it?
ever wear a velvet? What is the point? Would anyone
Sal,
wear
I'm sure you've worn a velvet hat.
Yeah, I've got 2 velvet hats.
Oh, there was it.
And a little band, a velvet band, yes.
Oh, maybe
but
it was...
that's from a passion perspective, not from a knocking on someone's window.
But if they were proper hikers, you'd stop and say, "Are you all right, mate?"
Exactly.
Can
But
we help
maybe they
you?
were trying to get his attention and he was so scared he wouldn't even roll down the window
Maybe
and
they're
talk to
saying,
them.
"Look at us in our fancy velvet hats. Which one of us do you fancy?"
Whoa.
But he couldn't get out because he was locked in.
Or maybe they weren't even there. Maybe they didn't exist.
Maybe he'd nodded off.
Maybe he was hungry and having a low blood sugar moment.
Anyway, what about the rest of
Anyway,
it?
I think lazy Chris sounds really annoying, and I
He
think it
does.
serves him right, actually. And also, why didn't he insist on having the keys while he was sitting there? I mean, that was a bit stupid.
He was stupid and lazy.
He was stupid and lazy. So I think the only thing that was wrong with this story is that it would have been better if Ron had told him what they'd done, said, "It serves you right, Chris, for being so lazy. Don't do it again," because he wouldn't have learned his lesson.
Yes.
But I think you are forgiven, Ron.
Okay, Mother Superior.
See, my first thought was that he wasn't being lazy; he was just being mean because he never wanted to buy a drink. I mean, did that come in? That didn't come into it, did
He's
it?
tight and lazy
Yeah, I think he's tight and lazy. And do you know how you can tell if someone is tight or not?
because they don't spend much money.
No, they got stiff thumbs. Seriously, if you've got a stiff thumb, you're very mean.
I'm not sure that works.
It absolutely is true. Shall I feel?
How do you know that?
Come
What
here.
is that based on?
Matt, very stiff thumb.
What's that
no,
based
you've got
on?
a little bendy bit on the end. What about you, Rebecca?
What's that
Oh,
bit?
very lovely thumb. She's very generous.
Do you read palms as well?
I do everything.
know,
Yeah, I
that's
do.
true.
Anyway, I think it was. I think it was really, really mean to leave him out for 2 hours in the cold with nothing. No matter how nasty he was, how unpleasant he was, how mean he was. So, as far as I'm concerned, you're not forgiven.
Brother Matthew.
Ron was at great pains, wasn't he, to point out how lazy Chris was.
Very lazy.
In fact, said lazy, I don't know how many times, said, "Oh, lazy, lazy Chris," when really, basically, it's Chris is able to get away with it because you let him get away with it. So actually, Ron, that's your fault. However, whenever someone says, "Oh, I'm running out of petrol," the first thing anyone in that car would do is look at the needle on the gauge and see whether. And the fact that at no point did this guy look at the gauge and go, "No, hang on, there's loads of petrol left. What are you on about?" So
Maybe he
is
took the
thick
gears out of the ignition
and-
very, very
and
quickly.
probably is lazy. So I've switched completely 180 degrees. I'm going to say forgiven.
And this from Lizzie, a true blue Aussie Anglophile. Because we asked for Australian confessions just a while back, and here's one. Dear Father Simon and the Generous Group, this is another Australian confession dating back to when I was in 4th grade, which is 10 years old. At this time in my life, I was living in Sydney. I was a very keen member of the school band at my primary school. There were various rehearsals before school and during lunchtimes, and I enjoyed every minute of them. I played the clarinet. One lunchtime, I thought there was a rehearsal, so I duly made my way to the school hall for music practice. Now, this school hall was quite new, with lovely wooden interiors, having been built with money raised by the local community and parents. And there'd recently been a grand opening ceremony for the building, and everyone was very, very proud of it. The door was open, as it should be for a rehearsal. If there was no rehearsal booked by a responsible teacher, surely the door would have been locked. Well, there was no one else there, which I thought strange, as there were a few other clarinetists in the band who should have turned up. But no. Well, I'll just go and switch the lights on, I thought to myself, thinking that this would be a helpful thing to do to get proceedings moving. I went into the wings, where the large, well, very large for a small 10-year-old girl, light switch panel was mounted on the wall. Can I just say now that I'm one of those people who are quite impatient with buttons and switches and that kind of thing. I tend to click the mouse on a computer several times instead of pressing the button just the once and waiting to see what happens. So I'm standing there, pressing all the buttons, not looking at the panel or whether there are any labels attached to the switches, either individually or by row, wondering when on earth the wretched correct light was going to come on. I obviously hadn't pressed enough buttons, so I just kept on pressing anything and everything to try and get the blooming light on. Nothing happened. Still no light overhead in the main hall. When my friend Lucy called out that no one else was coming, there were no chairs set out for the rehearsal, so maybe we'd got it wrong. Well, I tended to agree with her, as our music teacher was extremely prompt and would have been there by now if there'd been a rehearsal. So off we headed, not giving the phantom rehearsal and my button pressing another thought. Father Simon, it is at this point that I would like to suggest to all budding architects and interior designers that they do not place electronically operated vertical blinds above wall-mounted heaters, and that the placement of such items should be staggered, so that there is no way that a 10-year-old girl can press the buttons to lower the blind while turning the heater on.
Brilliant.
The next day in roll call, an announcement was made for anyone who knew about the fire in the assembly hall to come forward. We were all tut-tutting like good 10-year-old students, and I remember the word vandal being used by some of my friends. The culprit was never caught, but the sight of the charred and blackened interior wall, where the roller blind had somehow made its way down over the aforementioned wall heater, was a permanent testament to some idiot who wanted to destroy our newly built and much-loved school hall. I never made the connection between my randomly pressed buttons for the rehearsal that never was and the scorched school hall until when I was in 6th grade, age 12, when I had to go into the wings and turn on the lights for a music rehearsal. As I was a few years wiser by then, I actually looked at the panel of switches this time, and there before my very eyes were several neatly typed dynamo labels stating wall lights, ceiling lights, wall heaters, blinds. You get the picture. Yes, my random button pressing had actually brought down one of the automatic roller blinds, and it had landed on a wall heater that I had accidentally turned on in my quest for light. I got heat too. It took me months to acknowledge that all the evidence pointed to me being the guilty party, but a part of me just couldn't accept. I was a good girl and I was a teacher's pet. I couldn't do something like this. I left primary school with a terrible scar on the building, and I never told a soul. Until now. Father Simon, I need your forgiveness, please, not for keeping a secret from my teachers, but from all the parents who did all the fundraising to build the hall in the first place, and then had to do even more fundraising to get the internal walls fixed. Yours, Lizzie, a true blue, Aussie, Anglophile. Well, it's an engaging story, and I used to do backstage stuff, and there's a very confusing thing, you know, big number of buttons and levers and panels, very confusing. I imagine if you're 10, you're in a hurry. Is it an easy and understandable thing?
I know what she means about pressing the buttons and being really impatient. I'm exactly the same way, clicking the mouse, clicking until it all, implodes.
When you get in the lift, do you press the button like more than once?
Yes, of course. Absolutely. I know there's no point.
No point.
I know. It's like when it's really cold, you put the heating up to absolute full, thinking it's going to get warmer quicker. Of course it doesn't. She's quite right about the dodgy design, though. I mean, you shouldn't really design a building, a heater near... I mean, you shouldn't have a heater near a roller
It's the
blind,
architect's
should you?
fault, isn't it?
Well, it's the health and safety inspectors. It's somebody's fault. I mean, I don't think it's her fault, really, because that could have happened to anyone. So I think, also, I don't think there would have been any point in her confessing once she'd realised what she'd done. So I think, Lizzie, you're forgiven.
Thank you very much, Mother Superior. What do you think?
Well, I think on the whole she did a great thing because of her problem, they did then subsequently mark them with the little names, didn't they? So she's actually...
Well, either that or she just didn't notice them first time round because
Well,
she was 10.
She didn't... Oh, maybe, but she didn't mention that they were there. So that was hence her confusion. So she was just pressing everything.
She was.
But so I think that actually, not only am I going to forgive her, I'm going to say well done, because as a result of that, they did it properly, and they had little signs above every little light.
Is that right?
You're forgiven.
Thank you so much, Brother Matthew.
You know, I mean, the sensible thing to do here is to say you're forgiven because it's clearly a design flaw. However, I've got a massive problem with people who do the clicking too much. It drives me
You share an
nuts.
office with one.
Well, yes, and I share a house with one. And there's no need to
you live
name
with
names
Rebecca?
now. But no, not her. But there are people.
No.
There are people who just and they're also when I'm queuing to get money out at a hole in the wall, and they're pressing the button, and I know that, and you can't say because it's the hole in the wall and it's that private time everyone's got when they're getting money out the bank, but it drives me stir crazy. So for that, she's not being forgiven. Learn to have some patience when you're clicking and you're doing that button with your ATM, and if you live with me and you use a computer, stop clicking. Wait for it to work. Then stop clicking.
It's like a private counselling session.
Yeah.
Is that a man-woman thing, do you think? Or is that just stereotyping?
I think that's massive
Yeah?
stereotype.
that's stereotyping.
It's just a question that I was going to put out there. I'm not
It
saying
would
it
be
is.
stereotyping because that would make men rational and
Yeah.
women
Yes,
not
yes.
rational.
Okay, I
So
just
then
just wondered.
it's just a you thing. I
Yeah,
think.
clearly.
That's what
And
it
Matt's
is.
wife.
And Lizzie.
And Lizzie.
Oh, we're
Same
getting into
person.
all kinds of trouble now. Tonight's drive time confession, being heard, of course, by Mother Superior, Brother Matthew and Sister Rebecca, comes from Leonard. Thank you, Leonard. Dear Father Simon and the compassionate crowd, my confession dates back to 2002, and for nearly 11 years I have wondered how my actions may have scarred 2 young children. I was nearing the end of my first ski season for a well-known holiday company in the French resort of La Plagne. To set the scene, I was working in a hotel on the edge of the slopes where the males slept in dorms in the basement and the females slept in dorms split between the 4 floors and next to the guest bedrooms. It was the last week of the ski season and the snow had all but gone. To say we were demob happy was putting it mildly. Attention had already turned to the forthcoming summer season, and the thought of returning home to proper bacon, salt and vinegar crisps, bad breakfast TV, proper tea, chicken biryani, and day-old newspapers that didn't cost €4. There was, however, a small party of guests left in the hotel. This particular incident occurred on the last night of the season, before we were due to board a coach in the morning with the remaining guests. Those listeners who have been skiing will know that the transfer to the airport takes place very early in the morning. But with it being the last night of the season, the staff went out for one last drinking session. Needless to say, many shandies were sipped and stories of the season retold. Bearing in mind the 6 a.m. start, we left the bar in the early hours of the morning and headed back to the hotel to get some sleep. During the night, I'd been speaking to a female member of staff, who we shall call Wednesday, due to the large amount of dark eye makeup she always wore.
What?
Sure, I get that.
No, I don't get
Do you get that? No. I thought it was me being thick. Did you get that?
Was it a movie reference or something? I don't know. Wednesday? No.
Yes.
I don't
Anyway,
get it.
with it being the last night, I went back to her dorm, which she shared with about 5 other girls, to discuss the latest developments in world news. Fortunately for the listeners and Mother Superior, this is where details get a bit blurred, due, shall we say, to the altitude, the cold night air, and the complexity of the global situation, what with the news and everything. And we'd been having shandies. But what can I tell you? Well, after falling asleep, I woke up in the middle of the night with the urge to nip to the toilet. Slightly disorientated, I made my way out of the bedroom and across the corridor to the loo. The next thing I can remember was an irate man standing over me, shouting, "What on earth do you think you're doing?" Clearly disorientated, I replied with, "Get out of my room and let me go back to sleep." As I rolled over, I realised that my bed was in fact hard and cold, and white and curved. How odd, I thought. And it was at that moment I heard a young voice say, "Daddy, why is there a man in our bath?"
Oh, no.
Well, hearing those words quickly brought me to my senses, and I realised I had actually been asleep in a bath with nothing but my Neil Diamond boxers on. And not just an interesting concept at the best of times. And not just any bath, it was the bath of a young family who'd been sleeping in a bedroom across the corridor from Wednesday's room. A young and sensitive family, unschooled in adult misbehaviour. I quickly made my apologies, and while heading for the door, saw the faces of two scared-looking children, probably in Neil Diamond boxers. I smiled and said something like, "Hi, kids, always be good, remember." And I stumbled across the corridor, collected my clothes, and retreated back down to the basement. Within the hour, we're all boarding the coaches, along with the guests, to the airport. However, as we were boarding the coach, I heard the same young voice saying to a friend that they hoped they never came back to France, as they have bath monsters here, and they're very scary, and they come in the middle of the night if you've been bad and argue and don't eat your tea. So, Father Simon, clearly some tales have been told here. Father Simon, I don't seek forgiveness from the company that I work for, who frankly should know better than to have their staff live in the hotel, and neither do I seek forgiveness from the children's father who found me. He should have made sure the bedroom door was locked. But I ask forgiveness from the children whose bath I fell asleep in, for making them believe that in France they have bath monsters who come and stay with you if you've been bad. Well, we had women in velvet hats, ghostly women in Sussex, just a couple of days ago. Now we have the French bath monsters. This is the way legends start. And Leonard is responsible. What do you say, Sister Rebecca?
I have it on good authority that the Wednesday reference is to the Addams Family character.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yes, just thought I'd tell you that. I think he's...
Does that mean you got a voice in your head from our top production team?
It does, yes, it does.
Very good.
There you are. Thank you, production team.
research.
He sleepwalked, basically, right? Was he asleep?
Well, I think sleepwalking would be a generous way.
I think he was a little bit tipsy and he went in the
Okay.
wrong room.
And
Bit
didn't know where he
squiffy.
was, so he just went climbing in the bath.
I was going to say he couldn't obviously help himself if he was
nice of you being
sleepwalking.
charitable.
But the fact that he brought it on himself by indulging in alcohol early that evening.
Imagine that, Rebecca.
Yes, imagine that. But I can forgive him for that because I don't want to be a hypocrite. But I can't forgive him for the Neil Diamond underwear. So, Leonard, you're not forgiven.
I wonder if there's anyone else who's got a Neil Diamond boxer shorts-based confession.
It's a great thing to get into, isn't it? Yes. No, What
Really?
you should be doing, Neil, is releasing boxer shorts with your face on them.
Which album?
I was thinking, is a pair of Neil Diamond underpants, does it have his face all over them?
Probably, and on the back it would say, "I am the sun, you are the moon. You are the words, play me."
I mean, I think, as a record said, I was going to say, for that alone, it's an unforgivable confession. Who on earth would wear Neil Diamond? Yeah, I mean...
Very popular.
Do you know what? We've all been there. We've all had a bit too much to drink and we ended up in places where we shouldn't.
What, like a bath?
Have ended up. Yeah, I've done that myself, actually, yeah, absolutely.
Whose bath did you end up in?
Well, I can't remember, but I did end up in a bath with a duvet on top of me. So, I do forgive you, but the underpants, I'm not sure, but on the whole... Yeah, I forgive you.
OK, now, Brother Matthew speaks.
I mean, the underpants alone make this story, don't they, really? That's what we're going to remember from it. I love the fact that somebody has clearly been lying to their kids and saying, if you don't eat your greens, then...
Those bath monsters.
then that strange man with his Neil Diamond pants on is going to come and
That's
sleep in
clearly
your bath.
how you recognise a French bath monster.
It
isn't it?
is, yes.
They've got
'cause
Neil
they
Diamond
have-
pants.
They have pants with rock stars on them. What I don't like about this, though, is that he has ruined it for generations of ski workers after him who won't be able to stay in hotels, and they all have to stay in those, and we've all done that, have to stay in those awful chalet things.
Really?
They're
Known
not
as
good
chalets,
news.
aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
Yes.
Yeah, chalet type things, yeah. So I'm not going to forgive Leonard for that, because he's ruined it for everyone else.
And they were our confessions. Who did you forgive? We'd like to know. Plus, we'd like to know your own tale. To confessions@bbc.co.uk, or you can confess online. Go to the Radio 2 website, look for the drive time pages. It's all straightforward from there. More next week.